should we start here?
Hello, I'm Rachel Smythe. I make Lore Olympus, which is a... Oh, thank you so much. I make a comic. It's about Hades and Persephone, and I get my inspiration from Greek mythology. I almost forgot for a second because I'm very nervous.
I love Lore Olympus. I am Holly Black. I write, let's see. Okay, so I guess the two series I have going on right now are my first adult book, Book of Night, and my Book of the Air series. And for Book of Night, it's kind of shadow magic. And so I wanted to do something that felt numinous in some of the ways that like fairy stuff does, but also I wanted to go back to my roots of writing about sort of gritty stuff in our world. So it was really fun to get to do something that was different, but also went back to some stuff I love for a long time.
Hi, my name is Becky Cloonan, and I think, well, right now my newest book is with Distillery, which is a new publisher. They're down on the floor, and they've got copies of The Devil's Cut. Tula Lote and I did a little short kind of folk horror kind of thing in it, romance also. And with Tula, her work inspires me so much. We both wrote it and we both drew it, so it felt like such a weird, like creatively nourishing story that like I just haven't felt that much energy on a comic in a long time. And so it's felt really freeing. And this year I was like, I'm gonna draw more. It was my big resolution. I don't know if it's like a New Year's resolution, but it happened. So I'm drawing a ton and I feel great. And that's it. That's all. I feel really good. And I hope you do too.
Hello, I'm Linda Šejić, and I'm the creator of Bloodstein and Ponderworld. My latest work is Bloodstein. It's currently published, Volume 4, and I am now going slowly back to Ponderworld, Volume 2. Ponderworld is inspired by Greek mythology, and Bloodstein is inspired by my husband, who drew a picture for me, and it inspired me to create a whole comic around that. So. That's it.
Hi, I'm Stjepan Šejić. I make multiple projects when it comes to romance. Currently in the work are Sunstone Volume 8, Fine Print Volume 2, The Queen and the Woodborn, and Letters to the Vampire Queen, which is a novel. I find my inspiration pretty much in everyday life and mythology, so it's a nice little mix. It's fun to do. That's all.
Yeah, we have a really good variety of the age ranges that you guys write for and the types of romances that you write. Do you have a go-to process for planning the type of romance you're going to write? Like maybe the archetypes, the tropes that you want to use? Maybe we should start at the other end this time.
Well, when it comes to archetypes and the way I build my stories, I generally start with character explorations. Basically, since I'm predominantly a comic artist, I will generally make a bunch of sketches of characters and start with just them making jokes until they kind of start speaking to me. When they start speaking to me, I kind of decide on what kind of a personality they have. And past that point comes the hard part, the character writing, understanding what makes the character tick, what makes them flawed, what makes them inherently human. And from there on, it's just watching them stumble their way through to a happy ending.
I am the same.
Ditto.
Yeah, I was going to say, as an artist, I'm also the same, where I start out with a lot of sketches, a lot of drawings, and the same thing until these characters start like coming alive, and I'll have dreams about them, and that's when I know like the book is ready. I go straight to the end though, and I always think about like, what kind of horrible feeling do I want to leave the reader with? And it's always horrible. Because I love horrible characters, and I love when they're mean to each other, and I love tragedies, because my life is a comedy, I think, so like, maybe that's it. I love melodrama so much, it just flips out towards the other end. So I go in thinking about the end, and then I think, like, how do I get there? And it's always like, I try and do something where a lot of the books I write are short stories, or like, because they're comics, they take a long time to do, and then you're left with like a short thing. So I always try and put something in there that will make the reader want to go back and like revisit the whole thing by the end of the book. So it kind of makes you feel like you've read more than you actually have. So I think with comics, there's like a tendency, they just go so fast when you read it. So how do you make the reader linger in that a little bit more and really just feel the tension between the characters? Another thing I like to do is I call it UST, which is unresolved sexual tension, which is also my favorite horrible thing to do. So yeah, those are my basic go-to tricks, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
I try to think about the sorts of love stories I love. And a lot of times it is one of the things that I do at a pretty early stage with a book is try to figure out, okay, what is the relationship going to be, and like, how is it going to work? Especially because if I can get sort of the blocks of it, it really helps kind of form a shape. Unfortunately, a lot of times I come up with a weird thing I want to do, and then I'm like, okay, can I find a model for this? And then I'm like, maybe I can't. Let's say with Book of Night, I had an idea for how I wanted the romance to go, and it was maybe the hardest thing in the book to get right. It felt like I had to do like some math there, where I was like, it needs to be this here and that there. Oh no, that didn't work. And I went through so many different revisions, including the terrible revision, when I knew I had a problem. I thought I had fixed the problem. I brought it to my critique partners, and they said, you've made the problem worse. And at the very end, weirdly, what I figured out is that I had had an idea at a very early stage that I had abandoned, and I had to remember it and go back to it. But often I find like the romance piece to be one of the most challenging parts of a book to get right, and that the thing that is the most about calibration of small moments.
That's so true. That's a really good way to put it. The calibration. I like
That's
that.
so true.
Yeah.
I think my process involves a lot of like listening to Boys to Men, and then just a big glass of wine and like Celine Dion. You gotta get in there. Like Meatloaf. You know that Meatloaf video where he's like in a house and there's a lady on a spinning bed? I'm like, yes, all of this. So I kind of think about that and have a quiet moment to myself, and then I try to pull and think about, like, go to the opposite end and think about situations or feelings that are kind of really uncomfortable, that don't necessarily come up a lot, and find a way to make them accessible in a story where people understand them. And I think that's what gives like the characters the humanity. So that's how I try to balance out the cheese, which I love cheese so much, it's so fun. And then, you know, you have like these kind of very grounded moments. And I think also, I too like to treat my characters terribly. And then I'm super into like catharsis, so I'm like, when are we gonna do catharsis? So I'm like, first I'm gonna be mean, then I'm gonna take care of you, everyone's gonna feel good. And then everyone's gonna be devastated again, like really devastated, and like, you'll be like, how will they get out of this? And then, you know, find a way out, you know, like a little path, and that's mainly my process, yes.
I love that. You set the mood and then you go on the emotional roller coaster. So on that note, how do you decide what's the perfect way to complicate a relationship or a budding romance? Like, how do you decide what's the specific obstacle that this couple will have to overcome before the end? Do you want to start?
I think there's lots of ways to go about it, but you need to, you know, make sure that the romance is still there for people, but you need to do it in a way like where the characters aren't together yet, because once they're together, that's not as interesting. So you need to like put all these like cookie crumbs along the way, but like make it really interesting. Like I'm super into A Mutual Pine.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
very underrated, like just a longing, and I think that's very fun. And I think, yeah, you just find ways for them to be separated or make misunderstandings that are believable, or just tragedies. Sorry, I'm having a moment. where I can't talk
Tragedies?
properly. Thank you.
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that's what makes it fun.
Yeah.
I think that for me, like the thing that is the obstacle is sort of baked into the idea. It's sort of baked into what I want to do. It's often, it has to do with whatever their broken bits are, right? That are that they are sort of having to address throughout the book in general. But I think to me the most romantic thing is to see and be seen. And so like the thing about the book is like how do these people see each other in a way that other people don't? And how is that moment of like knowing that they are seen, like how does it come to be?
I think for me, a lot of times the romance is the obstacle. That's the thing that's messing the characters up. So digging into that, a lot of it goes back to like, what are these characters' tragic flaws? Like what's the thing that is the self-destructive part of this character, and how are they doing it to the characters around them? The newest book that I'm working on right now is it's a historical fiction. So I'm kind of going back to history and being like, what are some historical problems that they could have, which is just different from, the problems that we have now, which is, I think, a lot like social media and stuff. It's great, there's none of that. Like, don't have to worry about it. Yeah, so some of it is just, with this book, it's new. Usually the stuff I do is like low fantasy anyway. So there's a lot of like curses and, ghosts and werewolves and whatever, all that stuff, which is great problems for a romance to have. But yeah, a lot of it's the romance itself that's the problem. That's bringing these characters together. It's also the thing that's like the worst thing for them. And I think a lot of us can relate to that. At least I can, really. Just,
I love friendship. So I love writing slow burn. So for me, the characters needs to be friends before they actually get together. And it's going to take a very long time, but it's going to be worth it because they have to like go through a lot of things together before you know that these two characters can click together, and then you can that's kind of what I find the most romantic in stories. So I write about that.
I write about characters that are generally their own biggest obstacle to their own happiness, in one way or another. Because in a way, literally everybody that has ever lived has been a bit of a mess. And resolving that part, resolving the way, how do you find the courage to communicate? How do you find a balance between your life, a romantic life, and your other part of your life? How do you make those things, work together? And pretty much every single one of the characters that I write kind of has to go through the journey of figuring those things out. And a lot of the problems they have are in a way self-imposed, which makes it very fun to write and makes it very fun to kind of get into their heads, under their skin, And yeah, that's what I love doing.
Oh, thank you. So in terms of your writing process, do you have a formula? Well, because a lot of you write fantasy, do you have a way that you balance writing people that sometimes quite literally come from different worlds and they might not think of love the same way, feel love the same way? How does that factor into the type of story and struggle that they go through? Do you understand?
Well, luckily, I literally have a comic that's about that. That kind of has gods of desire and gods of love kind of at odds with each other, but at the same time are, inevitably attracted to each other. And writing the way they conceive love and desire and what those concepts mean beyond just, the obvious, what one might think about that, and how that relates to how humans relate to that it is a very fascinating process because there's a lot of stuff that kind of you never really have a chance to properly verbalize in a kind of a natural human dialogue between like two people, who have lived and loved their whole lives, But what if you exclude that experience on a very fundamental level? In fact, that experience is forbidden to these characters. Then you actually get to have them explore it on a level that usually you don't need to address because it seems blatantly obvious, but at the same time, it's the obvious stuff that's all often missed, and that's it's a whole lot of fun to write.
For me, yes, I also have a similar thing in my comic, but the characters I am writing, we have like the polar opposites of, we have one that's extrovert and one that's introvert, and in a way, the extroverted one is more outgoing and will basically take more chances to be with people, while the introverted one is going to be more secluded and basically not take it. So writing about these two characters ending up together and how they find that they are a missing puzzle of each other is very, very interesting to me. So that's basically Bloodstein. So that's the comic that's dealing with that specific aspect.
For me, when you said formula, I mean, comics for me, the format of the comic really does dictate a lot of how I tell the story. So if it's a monthly comic that comes out, which I've done so many monthly books, there is a formulaic element to telling that kind of story because you have 20 pages, you have to hit different emotional beats, different action beats, the ending. You know, editors like it when there's like a hook that will lead you into the next one. So there's very much like end on a cliffhanger. The biggest note I'd always get would be like punch up the ending. So it's like now I'm used to, like now when I go into a monthly book, I've got definite formula for how each issue is laid out, but then how does the overall arc kind of look? And now going into like longer format storytelling with graphic novels and with my new book, which is gonna be longer, like 40-page chunks, I have a way, like I can decompress the storytelling a bit, and it's definitely had an effect on the way I tell the story because I can do more of a slow burn now, which is more like my speed, like I enjoy it more. It's like, that's the kind of stuff I like when things simmer a little bit, you know? And the new book I'm working on right now is more mature, you know? I don't know if that's, and I do this thing. Right now, I call it escalating smut, which is, it's like, how do you pepper this in a way like what you were saying before? Like, how do you fine tune this romance? How do you, the big thing is to make the characters have so much chemistry before we even start drawing the book. It's like, you know,
Chemistry is very important.
it's so important, and I want the characters to feel it, and I want the readers to be able to feel it on the page so that, you know, you feel it from these characters, and you, like, I, as a creator, as an artist and a writer, I also feel it for these characters. So that's very much a part of it going in. And then how do you build that tension and the, you know, without doing too much right away, you want it to kind of crescendo. I don't know. That's, yeah. It's very different. It's super exciting right now for me because I'm like I feel so free with this story. It's exciting.
But writing floppies is so hard.
It's so
honestly.
hard. Oh
like,
my God.
Kudos.
Yeah, it's not easy. Yeah, and you'll never make everyone happy. So that's the tragedy of a monthly book.
Oh yeah.
That is the tragedy of all books.
But you make some people happy, and that's a really good feeling. Or unhappy. Really, it just
Depends on what you're going for, yeah.
Yeah, I'll take them both.
I think, you know, the thing about writing with magic, right, is that we get to tell familiar stories, but we get to tell them slant. Like, we all have the experience, perhaps, of, like, being super angry enough to say something that might hurt the people we care about. But, you know, our reactions in the real world to people who are angry are very different than our reactions would be to, say, a werewolf. You know, you don't ask a werewolf, why won't you calm down? And so, like, we get to tell different kinds.
Right now.
Well, like, so we get to talk about anger in different ways. And in the same way, when we introduce fantasy into romance and into relationships, we get to talk about love differently. You know, and when you're saying, you know, when you're talking about, like, well, what is it like when people have different understandings of love? Well, we all know what that feels like, right? But when you then move it into a different, like, where somebody is not human, well, then you literalize it. And through literalizing it, like, you get to tell that same story in a new way, and you get to see it in a different way. And I think that is the real power of it.
I think in terms, especially for writing for romance, I think fictional romance is very much like, it's not like, as you said, with like when you can't tell a werewolf to calm down, right? So like when you're writing romance, it can't be like a one-to-one translation of what like romance you have in real life, because in real life you have lots of communication and it's all very like good and things, and you know, if you read your own relationship in a book, you'd be like, this is very boring, like, you know? And so you need to like find a way to like present sexy situations in your writing and works that are, you know, I don't want to say palatable because it's not the right word, but like, you know, it's entertaining and it's not the same as like real life romance, and I think that's the challenge and the excitement of it. In terms of formula, so I write a comic which is published weekly, and so every week it has to have some form of cliffhanger, and so generally I will start with like the end of the episode first, so I know what I'm working towards. And that is how I go about formatting it. But of course I have like an outline I follow as well, and I kind of like shift it around as I need it. Yeah.
Good, thank you. Now let's talk about secondary characters. And
Well done.
given that secondary characters and their romances have less space on the page, how do you go about creating believable and engaging romances for people who are not your main couple, but you still want them to have that roundedness? Rachel, do you want to start? Sorry.
I think with secondary characters, for me, it's good to write from like supporting the main themes instead of starting new themes for other characters. And I think with like your B-side characters, for lack of a better description, you want to make them kind of like you want people to be curious about them, like what are they doing? And you'll find like in fandom often like the secondary ships are more popular because like there's more kind of mystery about it. And you're like, what are they doing? Like, how quirky are they? So I think there's so much fun and opportunity you can have with like your kind of other secondary characters to really enrich your story and also enrich the other relationships that you are writing. Yeah.
My problem is that I often write from a single point of view, or mostly a single point of view, and so I'm always, like, the two issues I feel like I'm constantly getting into is to try to make sure from a mathy point of view that people are not having the same beats in the same times, like they need to be on a different trajectory, but also it's letting you know what's happening, like without the main characters, you know, seeming like they're weirdly, I don't know, like listening to the door. Like it's so hard to introduce, to sort of like let you know about all these different relationships. So I think that is the thing that I constantly come back to. But I agree that having the same themes, figuring out ways to have sort of different approaches to those themes is really useful and fun. But I think it's those are the two issues where I'm like, I don't know.
For me, a lot of the secondary characters will be foils for the main characters to show, introduce problems or have them be, if it's a friend, it's like how do they complement the main character or do they get them into trouble? And that, like what you said, a lot of the secondary relationships are at different points where you'll start with these characters already in a relationship when your main character is not. And when I was doing work in monthly books, it was definitely like I would use the A, B, C kind of plot formula to, introduce problems here that simmer in the background that you can use later as like, oh, this comes to the foreground and becomes a thing. And it's a good way to develop your secondary characters because they're not, you don't want to keep their relationship the same.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have characters that break up in the background and then it affects things that happen in the foreground. And it's a good way to bring these secondary characters more to the foreground and have them take up more space in the story. And so it's a really good, that's been one thing for me for like a story like Gotham Academy, which was more YA in DC. It was a great way to like tackle an ensemble cast. There were so many characters in that book, and it was like, how do we keep these characters fresh? And even though there was one main character and the story is told from her point of view, all these other characters supported her story, and we couldn't have told it without them. And then, yeah, it's super fast. It's a cool way to do things. I don't know. The same thing with you. Like, a lot of my newer books are like one character's point of view, and so it becomes like, you know, the other characters do become more foils for the main character. But yeah, in an ensemble cast, I think it's super important to keep those rotating, you know.
And it's almost like you as the reader find out things are happening on the sidelines before the main character understands that that's what's happening.
And
so.
that's a hard thing too, because you want to, you know, your main character, if the audience knows something is happening and the main character doesn't, you end up repeating yourself as a storyteller, being like, and now we have to tell this again, and the main character has to find out, and it's like, how do you keep that thrilling for the reader when they already know that it's happened, and the main character is just finding out? It's like, you could either be like, oh wow, that's what a cool reaction that character had, or this character just really didn't realize this was going on. Like, come on. So.
But you only have so much pages.
You only have so many pages. You have 20 pages an issue. You got to just get it done.
So yeah, the same.
Linda with the same voice.
I don't accept that.
Like, I have character. I mainly focus on the main characters, so the side characters are always in the background. And just like she said, like, you are developing stuff in the background, and you are finding out through the main characters what the stuff is happening in the foreground, and you are slowly discovering things about them, and well, basically that. So yeah, same.
My solution to the secondary character problem is a simple one. I just give them another book. I'm going to die making these comics. This is not healthy.
He is in book 7 now.
Thank you. So now I selfishly want to know, out of your own works, which one was your favorite messy, complicated romance to write? And in which of your works can the audience find that couple? Let's start at that end.
So for me personally, the most interesting romance to write about is the one that's currently happening in the Sunstone arc, Mercy. And it's basically between this bisexual girl, Anne, and her lesbian girlfriend, who happens to be biphobic due to some events in her life, stuff that gets resolved and revealed at a later point in time. And it is a very intense story to write, and it is a very emotionally impactful and heavy story to write. And yet at the same time, due to the challenging nature of it, it's also the most interesting story that I'm currently writing, in my personal opinion.
I haven't gotten to the romance yet. It's a slow burn. But it's gonna be Bloodstain.
It's sizzling.
It's a slow burn tension.
It's on the stove. You're cooking.
Yeah.
Let it cook. I think the one that's closest to my heart is a short story that I did called Demeter, and it's a story about a selkie, which is it's usually like a woman who's a seal, and she's, you know, sheds the seal skin and can, you know, be a human for a bit. And when I started working on this comic, it was short, so it was like 20-something pages. And it wasn't working, and it wasn't working until I kind of switched it around, and I made the man in the relationship became the selkie. And he ended up being a sailor, and it's this kind of sad story about having a relationship in your life that you want to hold on to so bad, but you know that you have to just let it go. And it was like kind of a therapeutic thing for me to work through this book. And it's just about being lost at sea and not being able to find your way back. So yeah, it's in a short story collection called By Chance or Providence, which is just like kind of folklore-y, kind of romance, spooky stories. Yes.
Man, I did not know which one to talk about, but I'm just gonna, because I'm here, I'm gonna talk about why I had such a problem with Book of Night, which is that I really wanted to do something. One of my favorite books of all time is Ellen Kushner's Swords Point, and it has two characters who are already together. And that is the story I wanted to write. I wanted to write about people who were already together and, then stuff happens. And I wanted to try to figure out how to make, boy, do I now understand why people don't do that. It was really, really challenging, but it was something that I think because they're together, you wind up with all this history, and it was, there were things about it that when I could make it work were really, really fun.
I only have one thing, which is more limited. So I love writing Hades and Persephone just because the way that it's structured, they both are like polar opposites, and they both have very separate lives, and they know exactly how those lives are. And then when they meet each other, like all the concepts and all the ways that they perceive themselves are just shattered, and they cannot go on living the way that they are living anymore. And they just have to change themselves in order to move forward. Like, they can no longer do what they were previously doing upon meeting each other. So I enjoy writing the desperation in there and how they kind of like shatter, all the things that they were involved in when that happens, and how their lives sort of fall apart and then come back together again. It's like smashing something open and then sticking it together and making it look really good. Yeah.
I think there's like a Japanese art to that, right? Yeah. Thank you. So I do want to give you guys a chance to ask questions too. Is the best way to do that with just raising hands, or do you guys have a mic? Okay, raising hands. Yes, in the back.
Hi, my question is for Rachel. I'm a big Orleans fan. I know the comic comes out weekly and you see breaks and stuff. Is there an ending in sight for you, like an actual end?
I know what the ending is, but I do not know when the ending is. So I know thematically what happens, but the date to be confirmed.
Yes.
I was wondering, has it ever happened that when you started writing, you started thinking of this one couple, but as time went on, you noticed that another character was having more chemistry with it, and so you changed the couple?
Is that it?
To anyone?
I've never had that happen because in comics, I think it's, for me, all my comics are very like, the way when I start it and when I finish it, it's all just like you just have to, once you start it, you cannot change it because it's going to be a nightmare. But, sometimes characters surprise you, and I think being open to that and being like, how can I tweak the story, or when to know what's the right decision for the story, and when to know when to follow your original, because sometimes it's best just to stick to the plan, like when the plan you had in the beginning is the best one, just do that, but also like, where's the wiggle room for me? That's just being open to that idea.
It's like he says, it's like herding cats.
Yeah, it definitely is.
The worst part is when characters outgrow your plans.
Yeah. So that can happen.
I think sometimes we develop characters a certain way. Like, we have a certain idea of how we should tell stories, and then I think other things intrigue us because they have the element of surprise, right? And we are very attracted to surprise. And I think that, I think that you may need to collapse those characters so you can get the stuff you need from one and the stuff you need from the other, like in terms of your revision. You may not. You may find a different way, but there may be a way that you can take from that character that you're feeling all of that like attraction towards, figure out what is the thing that you like and stick it in the character you need it to be in.
I just want to add, what I like to do is, if I have time, I will explore this additional relationship to see if it works or if it doesn't. And then I will decide after that if it's worthwhile to include it and to ditch the main couple.
Yes.
This is for everyone. What are your favorite cliche romantic tropes? Like only one bed, forced proximity?
One.
I literally have the only one bed in the Queen and the Woodboard.
Now you have to say it. Share, please
I
share with the
literally,
class.
I literally have the only one bed cliche in the Queen and the Woodboard.
They literally have the one bed. Just one bed.
She lives alone. What?
I like enemies to lovers, but also stay enemies, you know? That's kind of the best for me.
Love that one.
I like enemies to lovers. I like anything where you have some power stuff, any kind of power dynamic
Oh,
stuff.
yeah, that's fun.
I like the whole make a distraction and shut up and kiss me kind of
God, yes.
Love that.
These are all good.
Question. Some of you have mentioned being inspired by Greek mythology. Do you ever try to go for biblical themes in your work, or have you been inspired by more biblical themes in your work?
I love the drama of the Old Testament. I'm not religious myself, but there's so much good stuff there. Just everyone always just getting beheaded and like being trampled. There's some good stuff in there. I think I also like history a lot, so I think looking at stuff, you know, story, any kind of story is worthwhile. And if you get something from it, and if you feel something from it, there's something you can pull from that and put it in your own work in a way. So yeah.
I think angels and demons are like from the Revelation that inspired a lot of people.
Oh, that's
to
like
kind
the,
of put.
that's like the cosmic horror
Yeah,
part of it.
exactly.
You get into it and you're just like, what is going on
Yeah,
here?
exactly. But love.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Question is for Rachel. When you first made a board like this, like a while ago, I think I saw something about you possibly getting into Egyptian mythology as well. I just wanted to know if maybe you had thought about branching into other types of mythology, or if you just wanted to stick with.
I think, I'm trying to think back. I think I was talking maybe about Norse mythology, potentially. I feel like I don't know enough about Egyptian mythology, but it's definitely worth exploring. And I always, like, any type of mythology is always fascinating and rich, and is always like a really inspiring base for like any story. Like, it's a good go-to. Yeah.
My question's for Rachel. Is anything else, I know you only have one, but anything else in the works or that you're kind of thinking about or possibly doing?
You know, as a creator, and I'm sure I'm like everyone here, we're always like coming up with things on the side. So, you know, like I try to not do it like too much because I feel like I'm cheating on my story a little bit. I'm like, no, it needs all my focus, but occasionally I'll have like a palette cleanser. That's what I like to call it, and I'll go and like write a short story. So I do have stuff on the side that I'm working on, just to have. And like, I don't know if it will, you know, turn into a thing. Like, it's still, a lot of it's at like the little baby stage, and you kind of keep working on it in little bits, and sometimes it turns into something and sometimes it doesn't, but it's just a good break from like the main thing that I work on.
Yes.
So I know it was mentioned that your romances in your own life aren't as interesting as the romances that you write. But I'm wondering if for all the panel, if there's anything in your own romantic history that has inspired a scene in what you've been writing.
Can I take the fifth on that?
Yeah, if you're willing to share, given the audience, it does say some of the audience may be under 18.
I will say sometimes it's good to like, a lot of my stuff it's not autobiographical, but I'll pull feelings that I've had or like things, but it's so wrapped up in genre and in fantasy that no one would ever know. You know, like if anyone, you know, read it, they wouldn't be able to tell. So I think that's important for me. It's mysterious.
So this isn't exactly my romantic history, but my husband and I like play a game where whenever we're like driving or we're sitting around, like we'll tell a story, like a long ongoing story. about different characters that we have like kind of made up out of the years. It like grew out of the fact that we used to play Dungeons and Dragons many years ago. And that's how we met. We were rival dungeon masters.
I want this story.
And so we make up this story, and like when I was writing Folk of the Air, I actually borrowed a whole bunch of characters and situations that were from our like story.
Can I come on your next road trip? Just in the back. Can I just sit in the back and listen, please?
We'll be drawn in.
Yeah.
I plead the fifth.
Same.
Go ahead.
Have you guys ever had any minor characters that suddenly became like a huge deal? Like either with your fans, that you're like, yeah, I just wrote them in because I needed somebody to be there at that time, so the main characters could see them, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, everyone loves them.
Yes. There's a ship of this character like Meg, who is a fury, and there's a random bouncer from one episode. He doesn't have any, I don't think he's got a line. Like, he's just a dude. I think he's like, you can't go in, I think that's it. But there's like comics out there of it, like fan comics, and I'm like, wow, this blew up. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is actually kind of piggybacking off of some of the other questions, but like for me, if I'm just writing a term paper, sometimes I find myself going off on a tangent. It's like, it's not useful for that paper, but I can do a different thing about the subject. So I was just wondering if you guys find yourselves in similar situations, kind of like the two on the end, you guys write multiple different storylines at once. So I'm trying to figure out maybe that's something you guys use.
Generally for me, I often start exploring tangents, and sometimes from those tangents an entire new storyline is born that later on becomes the thing that torments me endlessly.
Everything where I always go to myself, nothing is wasted. So if I have to cut something, which is all the time, I've cut whole issues, I've cut whole storylines, it's not wasted. There's always a way to come back to it, or it's always going to be there for you. So even if you end up writing a whole thing and you're like, went off on this crazy tangent, it's just not working, don't feel bad about cutting it, because sometimes you have to, and it's just for the good of everybody involved.
That's so true.
It's so true.
Since I write comedy, there are sometimes jokes that don't fit in the particular situation, even though I wrote it like that originally, but the characters took a different path, and so this particular joke no longer works. But that joke can be used in the future if there is a proper place for it. So nothing is wasted. Just like
She
you
has
said.
over 100 side strips just.
Yes.
Yeah, I cut an ear piercing scene out of my very first book that then made it into a much, much later book. And in Cruel Prince, this guy Garden has a tail, and I cut that tail from a different guy in an earlier book. I took it, and I like got it, so I just had this tail hanging around waiting for someone to come and have it.
I think for me, like I'm quite I meander a lot when I'm writing, and so even if I have to cut it, I feel like it's not a waste because it helped me get to where I needed to be. And like often I'll just I'll pop it to the side, and quite often, like especially with comics, having like an economy of panels, you can only have so many, and sometimes either you will have too many that you cannot fit into a single chapter because it's impossible, or you'll reach a chapter that's too short. So you can take that bit, and it's kind of modular, and just pop it in there to, make it more cohesive. Like it can always you can fit it in somewhere else. It's cool. But yeah.
Okay, right here.
Do you ever do stories where you mix comedy with tragedy? I don't know if you're familiar with Patricia Briggs' short story, Gray. And in that story, the whole story is tragedy because the main character is responsible for the death of her husband. But it shows you the love all through it because of her guilt and the other things that go on.
Is that for me?
It's for everybody.
Personally, that's kind of what I'm doing with my current series, Fine Print, where there's a lot of comedy, but the ultimate result from that, from the get-go, like from page one, people as they open it, they understand that the story has a tragic ending, and then it's how you get there. And there's a lot of comedy through that, but the lessons learned aren't funny. They're, in fact, very impactful and downright heartbreaking, so yeah.
For me, it's not. I'm just writing pure comedy.
I just like a funny.
Yeah, I just like a funny. I just want people to feel happy.
For me, it depends on the book. With the Gotham Academy, which was more YA, there was a lot of lighthearted moments, and a lot of our touchstones for it was like stuff like Scooby-Doo and stuff like Nancy Drew, and it really had like a lot of different elements to it, but it was that balance of, we went in thinking we were gonna do, this story has a sad ending, even though it's a story about coming of age and everything. We wanted this to tell a story about a character it takes place in Gotham, so it has all like the Batman tropes, but the main character's mother was sent to Arkham by Batman, so she hates Batman, and her mother's like a supervillain, so, I mean, you know, hypothetically. And she goes to this prestigious boarding school on a Wayne scholarship, so Batman saw that he, you know, made this girl has no place to live and she's a ward of the state, so he's like, oh, you can go to this school, I'll make it better, or whatever. It's typical Batman stuff. And the whole thing at the end when we started it, I was like, we have to make her, she has to turn bad at the end. And that's the big tragedy, is we're telling a story about her and her best friend are like the two characters, and that's the tragedy for her best friend, Maps Mizuguchi. And the story was gonna be about Maps having to grow as a character. And then we got to the end and I was like, we were just like, I don't know if we can do this. I don't know if we can do this. So it still has a sadness to it. But in that is very lighthearted. You know, it's just like life, I think. My other work is like a bit more folklore-y, so it's a bit more moody and there's less humor because it's, you know, got a whole ambiance or whatever. But with that story in particular, we were able to bring in a lot of human elements. Yeah, it was nice.
I think one of the journeys I've been on as a writer is to accept that I could be funny. Like, as a person, I think never thought of myself as funny. I thought of myself as very, very serious.
That's how you know you're destined for comedy.
And at some point, my friend said to me, like, but you're funny, you make us like, and she pointed out that in my work, there were moments that were funny, and they were this often contextual humor, and learning that and sort of seeing it in myself and figuring out how to actually put it in the writing has been like a huge shift in my seeing myself and my work.
I think really good comedy comes from tragedy. Like, I think if you're working with a tragedy, comedy can really bring levity to it. And I just think there's a duality there that's really interesting to work with if you can get the balance right. I mean, like for me, this is like a bit anecdotal and it's like not fictional at all, but once I was having a really terrible day and I was crying, but I also have an Apple Watch, and Apple Watches will like give you a celebration spiral if you get your step count up. And I was like crying and it was walking around and it was like, congratulations. And I was that was very good. So yeah, it's like a good balance, it's like good liberty, yeah.
So much of it is about timing.
Yes,
right?
it is.
It's like horror, comedy, these are things that are like intrinsically linked. It's like, I've been actually going back and watching a lot of the Key and Peele stuff again.
Yes.
So good, but it's like a masterclass in timing because so much of those are so funny, but they're also so scary. They have this like weird flip, and it's just a masterclass in how to get that timing right. And romance too is all about timing.
Well, speaking of timing, we are out of time.
Such a good segue.
Thank you for that. But this is just day one, so you can see this wonderful panel of authors and creators and comics artists, this entire convention everywhere. Just check the schedule. And so give yourselves a hand and give them a hand.